first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gretel, for inviting me. Did I understand correctly? Is this the first of these meetings that you...
Yeah.
Wow. Well, ladies, that is such an honor to me to be invited here. I've met some of you before, but lots of you I've never met. So just thank you so much for inviting me, for having me. Thank you for the spirit of honor that operates in this house. It is such a humbling experience to actually... it's such a humbling experience to just stand before you. A lot of people know my husband. They know his ministry. They know the gifts that he has. But I just want to say before we start that this is new to me. I've been a believer for a long time, but actually standing in front of people and sharing the gospel, sharing my experiences, sharing messages of hope, of redemption is pretty new to me. So just ask for your grace and your indulgence with respect to that. My style may be a bit different from what you're used to. I'm a lawyer by training, but I promise you that there'll be no legalism in what I'll be speaking to you today. All right, so we'll just get started. As Ms. Gretel said, Felix and I just came back from about 3 weeks in South Africa. South Africa is a place that's very dear to my heart. My closest friend is actually a girl that I met in college, and she's from a neighboring country, Namibia, and she's been to Cayman dozens of times over the last 20 years. 2 years ago, I realized that if I didn't actually make that trip, that long trip, and I know some of you are Africans in here as well, and you know what I mean when I say that long trip. If I didn't make that long trip, I might have lost a friend because she was getting married. And so she'd been to Cayman, I had to go. That was 2 years ago. She got married, we had a fantastic time, and she invited me to come back because she just had a baby. Now, I knew I would not get my husband on a 15-hour flight just to go visit an infant. So the Lord in his mercy created a wedding for him, some friends of his. So we were able to go to that wedding. We were to spend some time with the baby. But because we're in ministry, we also prayed in advance, Lord, use us during this trip. It could have been everywhere. It just happened to be South Africa. It could have been anywhere. But it was a special place for us because it's a big trip, just physically, right? And so we prayed in advance, Lord, use us, show us, guide us. And so we went with a spirit of expectancy, but like Felix said, we believe things, but sometimes, it might or might not happen. And so Ms. Gretel has asked me to share a message of encouragement and a message of hope with you. I heard her talking about her heart for women and for women to embrace each other and women to really just walk along and not just pray with, but pray together and to come together as sisters in Christ. But I want to take a step back from that, and I'm going to talk about that in the context of a message I prepared for you, because it's one thing for me to try to be nice. It's another thing for me to be empowered by the Spirit and to be bearing the fruit of the Spirit in my life, all right? And I can only really do that. I can be a born-again believer, but until I'm really rooted in my identity of a daughter of the Most High, of someone who sits alongside Christ in the heavenly realms, someone who can actually go in the throne room and to present my petitions to the Lord Most High. Unless I really have a revelation of what that means, all of these things that I try to do, and I try to minister to my sisters, to my brothers, will be from me, and may not, it is God's will that we do good, but He will give us a supernatural grace when we do what His intentions are. So He will empower us to do the impossible. So that's kind of where I want to start with. And it's amazing how the Lord worked when we were away. And there are 3 short stories that I want to tell you about 3 little boys. They're about between the ages of 2 and 3 that just supernaturally came in our path. And they might have come in our path, or similar stories might have come in our path in Cayman on a shopping trip to Miami. But the Lord used South Africa because I think we were away from home, away from those distractions, and we could kind of focus on what was in front of us and see the greater revelation of His love and His prophetic message to us, to really stop and look at what He's presenting to us and relate that back to what He is doing in and through us in this ministry and in our personal lives. So forgive me if I get a little emotional, because these stories about these 3 little boys is quite emotional, and everyone in here is a mother or a father, or at least, if not to physical children, to spiritual children, okay? And so these stories, I'll start with the first one. When we were in Johannesburg, which was where we were kind of initially based, we were staying with my friend who is not a believer, the same young lady that I told you who has just had a little boy. And she said to me, "Oh, Dorothy, I'm going to drop you and Felix to the mall, but I have to go to the hospital right next door because my friends son, who was born a vegetable, right? That's the word she used, and that's truly what he was in the world's eyes, is on his last. The doctors have said that this little boy, she needs to prepare her heart and her mind to let him go. So, little boy's name, I'll share his name because he's passed away. His name is Matthew. And his name is not so much important, but what I'll tell you about his name and how it connected back to the mother and the father's heart is pretty impressive, or pretty amazing, I think. So when I heard this story, I'm like, wait a minute, we have a healing ministry. We believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to come upon someone to heal, and it is God's will to heal, to see everyone operate the way that He intended to create. God's will is always to heal. It is always to restore. It is always to redeem. So I said to her, and I eventually said it to Felix, and she orchestrated, and asked the mother, hey, I've got some visitors from Cayman, they're ministers. Would you like them to come for prayer? And I overheard the conversation, and the first word out of that mother's mouth was, yes, please. She's not connected. She's a believer in the loose sense, but she's not connected to a local ministry. So off we go to this hospital. Not really sure what to expect. My husband had gone off to the side in the cabana in the yard and prayed and tried to prepare his heart to minister. And we agreed as husband and wife that he would lead, because he's the mature believer, if you like. He's got more experience. Let's just put it that way. He's got so much more experience in ministry, and I just wanted to follow his lead, his spiritual leadership with respect to that opportunity. So we go there and we're confronted with a 2-year-old boy who was born not able to see, not able to hear. He wasn't able to swallow on his own, so he had a tube in his belly. This is a 2-year-old, a big 2-year-old, but a 2-year-old nonetheless. He's never been out of the hospital. So a tube in his belly, a respirator through his throat, because he'd gotten to that point where he couldn't breathe. And so really, in all intents and purposes, from the world's eyes, just waiting to die, okay? He had been born with severe birth defects, and I'll share this, not to condemn the mother, but to give you an idea of her pain. She'd been taking a medication all throughout her pregnancy, and neither the doctor prescribing the medication or the doctor, her OB, advised her that this drug was known to cause birth defects. So you can just imagine the journey this mother has been on. She loved her son. She loved her son. She's a youngish woman. She's probably in her early 30s. And for the last 2 or 3 years, she's been at his bedside, trying to work. She's a single mom, trying to work, trying to provide, and just there with this boy. So we go in, and he's agitated. He senses his mother's presence. Now remember, he can't see or hear, but he does have hearing aids, so maybe he heard her voice. And he just reached out, and he was agitated in this bed. Remember, there's all these wires coming out of this little boy. And he just reached for her, and she brought her face near to him, and he did like this, and she did like that, and he comforted and he calmed down. We prayed over him. We laid hands on him. My husband put his hand on his head, and we just prayed a blessing over this boy. We prayed for healing. We prayed for restoration. We prayed and we spoke life over this little boy. We valued him and we loved him, because that's what we believe the Father's heart is to everyone, regardless of their physical, spiritual condition. The little boy was agitated, and when we laid hands on him, he calmed down. The presence of the Lord was there. Okay? We did our job, right, as ministers. We prayed for the mother. We released the word of life over her. And we left there confident that a miracle had happened. And a miracle had happened, but it wasn't what we expected. Okay? We left, and we had to pause for a period of time for some nonsense to get like the parking ticket validated. So the mother went in, and we were sitting chatting with some other people, and we said, wow, this is taking a long time. Eventually, about 30 minutes later, the mother returns, and her face is just white, like she's lost all color, and she's panicked. She says, my son's oxygen rate just dropped to 5%. There's an issue with his breathing tube. It's a good thing I went back. They're now panicking and trying to restore him. Long story short, we sit, we pray, we intercede on behalf. We leave because the doctors tell us everything is settled. About an hour, 45 minutes, an hour later, we're at lunch and we get the call. The young man just passed away. Now that was a very challenging time for us, as you can imagine, for anyone. About 20 minutes later, the mother calls. And here's one part of the revelation the mother received. She said, my son was so special in God's eyes that he would send 2 strangers from a country I've only ever heard of one time to come and bless him. And it was the mother's heart and her belief. She knows this child intimately. He's her son. She believed that when we laid hands on him, he had transitioned. His spirit had transitioned into the Father's hands. And it was just his body that followed afterwards. So that's the first young man. While my husband was praying for this young man, he kept on referring to him as Mateo. And I was like, oh my goodness, could you not pay attention? The child's name is not Mateo. Could you please, this is what I'm saying in my mind, right? I'm like cringing. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, his mother's going to be so offended. But then I saw something on her face. I saw an image of recognition and an image of peace on her face. Did you know that no one told any of us that that was his name, but the Lord put it on my husband's heart that that was his name for him. And this mother, that was her pet name that she would whisper into this little boy's ear, my Mateo. And so when we were praying for him, and he had that word of knowledge from the Lord, this mother knew that something miraculous was happening, and it gave her a supernatural sense of peace. Now that's not to say that we are so godly and we are so wonderful. We were distraught. It was hard. How do you explain to a non-believer, we're going there thinking there's going to be this physical miracle, and physical miracles do happen, I believe, and I know that I'm going to see it before I go to heaven, that we will see the dead raised to life. We will see creative miracles. I believe that, and I'm confessing that over all of you today. It didn't happen then. It didn't happen in that moment in the way we anticipated. So let me park Mateo. Let's call him that because that's his miracle name. Let's park that for a minute. A couple of days later, we were in another town, in another city, visiting some believer friends, and we had prepared in advance to visit a ministry that they thought we would be interested in and that we could as a couple could sow into. Okay? And we're just coming now from Mateo, so you can imagine our heart is still heavy, and we're going to see more children. And we know that these children now have challenges because this family is a family that are part of a ministry, and it's where they are creating an opportunity for families to adopt children from disadvantaged or impoverished neighborhoods. And so this family now has adopted not one, not two, but 4 children under the ages of about 5 or 6. And when we arrive there, we see children playing in a pool, kind of like this, a little smaller. And we're all from the islands. We know what the joy that children have when they're playing in a pool and they want to get in the pool. We're having a braai or a barbecue. And we're just observing these children, and we're holding these children and loving on these children. My husband in particular, because he just prayed for a child that had passed away, gravitated towards the son, the 2-year-old. The mother is a minister of the word, and she has a blog, and she refers to this little boy as beloved. That's what her name is for him in the blog, because he's not yet her adopted son. She's fostering him. She refers to him as beloved. So I'm going to try to refer to him not by his name, but as a word, his miracle name, beloved, throughout this. My husband picks him up playing. This little boy is fascinated with him. We're just having a good time, just romping, if you like, with these children and the life. These children, each of them has a different story. This one, but I'll focus on the little boy. Beloved, when he was adopted, is HIV positive. He had tuberculosis. I didn't even know that really still existed. He had rickets. He had and he was fostered at about 6 months, years old. All of these issues. In addition to that, the signs of real neglect, both physically and developmentally. A real hard case. The 3 little girls, equally hard. One of the little girls, for example, I'll just give you an example of how hard her case was. She had, again, all of these issues, and she needed to have a surgery at about 2 or 3 years old to remove each of the teeth in her mouth because she was so impoverished in terms of like her nutritional needs, etc. The doctors, let me tell you how challenging her case was. The doctor said to the mother, why are you going to bother to remove these child's teeth? And the mother said, because this child is going to live and she's going to thrive and she has a purpose. Amen. So the mother had to really force the issues with the doctor and release this child. And she has no teeth now, but she got the most beautiful smile. Anyway, beloved is now, if you take a test, his test will say that he's HIV negative. All of his diseases have been cured. Wow. He is operating as a son, adopted into a family. Is that not a picture of what God really wants for us? He's adopted into a family. So we had an amazing time with this little boy. I'm going to come back to them and just share my heart about these individuals. Beautiful, a sign of redemption, of just God's purpose and plan to take us out of our misery and our poverty that we may not even understand, to give us a life, to give us a home. He has a purpose to prosper us. The third boy, we don't even know his name. We don't even know his name. We were going along the waterfront, which is an area kind of like Kamana Bay, and we're taking photos, and I actually have a photo of the same little boy in a photo of my husband with the beautiful mountains in the back, which was, right? And we're walking along, and there's this little boy running along beside us. And I'm like, who this child's parents are? So we go along, I'm like, no man, that couple over there must be his parents. You don't see a 3-year-old run around, and this is a big area, okay? This is not like Kamana Bay where you run from one fountain maybe to one side of the next. This is a huge area. And for those of you who don't know, there is an issue of child abduction and child stealing in this particular area, right? And so we're just watching this little boy, and we say, he's lost. We went for about, about an area of about, 500 feet, and there's no adults around looking for this little boy. The only adults that were kind of walking along with him were us. So my husband goes up to him and holds his hand and says, and I said to him, where's your mama? And he looks at me like, he's about 2 or 3. I said, do you speak English? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I mean, children are trained not to speak to strangers, right? So we take his hand along and we walk him back the direction that we came, thinking that maybe someone will come out and be like, oh my God, that's my child, take my child, like thank you, but give him a child. Nothing. We walk, and at one point the little boy tears his hand away from my husband and runs off. And so we run behind him literally, and I'm thinking, I'm here praying in tongues like, Lord, I don't know what is going on. Somebody's gonna think we're trying to steal their child. Help me. Okay. Eventually, we take the child. We go to a booth and say, we found this child. Some of the vendors at the side. What do we do? Security guard, tell us, what do we do? Maybe you should take him to the information booth. And I'm at this point afraid, because I'm thinking, this little boy is lost. This does not add up. This little boy is, when I say lost, he is lost. So we eventually go, and one of the fellas comes along with us. God bless him, because he obviously had a heart to make sure that everything was okay with this little boy. We walked this little boy to the information booth, and did you know within about 2 or 3 minutes from nowhere comes his father. His father was looking for him. His father was not angry, he was not upset. He just embraced his boy, and the boy lost it. This is when this little 3-year-old just started crying. He was embraced by his dad, and that's when he realized he had been lost, and that's when he realized that he'd been found, and he just cried. He knew that there was something wrong with these people holding his hand, but it was when he encountered his daddy that everything came into sharp focus. Oh no, I was lost, but now I am found. I just want to share some thoughts that I wrote about these children. And as you can see, this is part of a wider message that I think will probably develop a bit more. So again, have some grace with me. With the first child, Mateo, this is from my personal journal. This is what I wrote. We were born into a fallen world, but we each have a purpose and a destiny. We were each beautifully and wonderfully made. We may be blind and deaf to spiritual things, but something in our spirit calls out to the Spirit of God our Father and longs to have him, like that little boy's mother, draw near and just touch our face. Amen. When he holds us close, we sense his presence and it calms us. Wow. When he holds us to his chest, in his arms we receive his peace that surpasses all understanding. Regardless of our state, we are perfect in his eyes. He draws us near when we call out to him, and he is proud of us, and he longs to see us restored and operating how he intended. We are helpless and lost without him. For beloved, I wrote, God calls us out from our poverty and adopts us into his home. He adopts us and prepares a table before us. He cures all our diseases. He tends to our wounds and heals all of our deep trauma, inner and outer. He loves us more than we could ever dream. He fights battles for us while we just sit and drink milk, safe in his care. He protects us. He nurtures us. He delights in us. We cost him everything, but he calls us beloved. He delights in our growth. He is interested in our dreams, and he provides a family, look around you ladies, for us to grow and to learn to love. Our role is to be a son or daughter, to grow in his presence and to release our gifts. while we were there, we taught this little boy, we were just standing on a step, we said, okay, I don't know, it was just nonsense, but you do it what you gotta do with children, keep them occupied. So we stood on a step, and my husband and I held his hand, we said, 1, 2, 3, and he jumped. And he learned this over the course of this time, just to hold our hands and jump off of a little step about that high. Do you know when we saw them a couple days later in church, he said, you know that child did 1, 2, 3 and jumped into the pool? The point is, that little boy was so confident that he could be a child. He could take risks. This was a child who used to sit in a corner because he didn't know what love was. But he was, in the context of that adoption, he was so incredibly safe that he could take risks in his daddy's presence. He is one image of a redemption. We are all adopted and co-heirs with Christ. With the third child, these are my notes. Sometimes we go astray. We can be born again believers, we can be operating in the spirits, but sometimes we don't even know it, but we just walk off our path. We're all like sheep that go astray, the Bible says. We think we know where we're going, but we may not. And this is why we need community, right?
Yes.
People will come along sometimes to offer to help, but sometimes we just bluff and reject. I got this, I know. And reject the help for all kinds of reasons. We may genuinely think we're okay, but sometimes we don't even know we're lost. It really does take the faith and the perseverance of a brother or sister in the faith to be gentle and to persevere, to lead us back to our Father, to take the risk. It was risky, right? I thought we were going to get arrested for holding this little child, okay? But we, in doing that, if you are that person who is leading someone back to the Father, we have to project leadership and maturity. We have to meet that person where they're at. I was panicking, I'll confess that, and it took my husband's maturity to be like, to stop, be calm, and just leave this little boy, because if we had projected fear, we had projected anything negative to this little boy, it would have created a bigger problem, right? Those who are not lost, I wrote, will never benefit from our alarm or fear or worse, judgment, but they will cling to the Father when they encounter Him and when they are restored to Him. I speak about these 3 boys, and I speak this over your lives because I really want to ask you right now, where are you in your spiritual walk? I really want you to take some time to consider that today in the context of the safety of your sisters. Are we beloved? Are we thriving in our adoption, learning to take risks in the presence of our Father? Are we really living through the benefits of what it truly means to be brought into that home and to be equal in God's eyes to His very Son, Jesus Christ? Are we lost? Are we kind of walking off the path and going along thinking we're okay, but actually might need an encouraging word or to be brought back in? You know, the thing was, when we restored the little boy to his daddy was not mad. There was no emotion on that daddy's face but joy to having received this lost little boy back into his arms. And that's how God views each and every one. He does not care what you do. He just wants you back in His arms and living in the covenant of His will. Now the first little boy, it's actually very challenging. Did God intend for this little boy to be born this way? I don't think so. So why was he born with all of these issues? Who do we ascribe the blame to? Do we create a theology out of the things we don't understand in the natural? And I'm going to say this plain. No. Never create a theology based upon what we don't understand or what we don't know. Okay? Any failures of man trying to operate, or any sin we see, it's not that we don't address it and care for people and try to restore them, but we ascribe it to mystery, and we say God in his sovereignty knows what is happening. I don't. My role is to love. But then the miracle in that hospital room was less about Matthew. Matthew was born perfect in God's sight, and in an instant he was transported right into a garden and he was playing with Jesus. I believe that wholeheartedly. He was instantly transported when his spirit left. The miracle was with the mother. The mother had a supernatural grace on her life that brought her inner healing. I can't explain it, and I don't ask anyone to explain it. I will simply say, praise God that we were able to witness this and to play whatever small role we were in that supernatural mystery. I can tell you right now, I have been in each one of those categories at different times in my walk. And right now, each of you ladies and gentlemen, you may see yourself in each of these boys, right? But God's heart, it doesn't matter to him whether you think that you're broken, you think that you are so far gone that the world says that you're a vegetable. He doesn't care. His heart is always to heal. It is always to restore. And God is always good. And God always wants to draw you back into his arms. Again, when we see failure, I just encourage you ladies, if you can't explain it through what you read or understand in the Bible, just trust God. Be the child. How many times do you have to say to your child, trust me? You don't understand the bigger picture. Don't try to understand, just trust me. And that's one of the hardest things we can do. So if you find it hard, like I do sometimes, to trust, will you pray for that supernatural grace? Just pray. And I leave this, I'll close with this. I'll invite my husband to kind of finish up. God is always good. He is always good. Whether we see it with our natural or our spiritual eyes, he is always good. And he is always on our side. And he is always calling us back. And there is nothing on heaven or earth in the spiritual realm that can separate you from the love of the Father. Your role is simply to trust and say yes. So God bless you. God bless you, ladies. Thank you for inviting me here today. And I just pray that there will be a revival in your hearts, and that you as mothers will receive as daughters and release as mothers to other women in your congregation and in your wider life. I bless you, I bless you, I bless you. In Jesus' holy and mighty name. Amen.